Today is February 7th, 2024. I'm Joe Reingold, and I'm with Jane Pawgan. Okay, Jane, take it away. Tell us about your background and about living in Dallas.
Interesting background. My mother's parents were divorced when she was about 18 months old, and my mother was born in Fresno. So my mother and my grandmother and her father, I guess my great-grandfather, moved to San Antonio, and my grandmother had to put my mother in a Catholic convent because she had to go to work and there was no daycare. So my mother, by the time she was 3 to 6, lived in a Catholic convent. In the meantime, by the time my mother was 6, which was about 1922, someone introduced her to a widower from West Texas named Abe Levy, who had owned a store and had 3 daughters. And his late wife's sisters were trying to take the children away from him because they didn't think a single man could raise 3 girls. They were probably right. So anyway, a match was made at Shidduch, and so my grandmother married Mr. Levy, and so my mother and grandmother moved to Sweetwater, Texas, where he had a store, Levy Brothers. And my mother was the youngest of the girls. And I wrote about Levy Brothers in an anthology, Lone Stars of Texas, which was in 2004. It was 350 years of organized Jewish life in North America, and there was a Texas book. So I have a chapter about the store at Sweetwater, Levy Brothers, and it was a nice store. It carried Hart Chapter Mark suits, Charles Loritz cosmetics, furs, because at the time there was a lot of money in West Texas, and the store not only supported 4 girls, sent them to college, but they had a lake house, and it's the summer my grandmother and the 4 girls rented a house in Santa Monica for 2 months, which is more than I did. Anyway, so that, and my mother went to the University of Texas and graduated at 19 because back then high school was only 11 grades to begin with. So in the meantime, my father was born either in Latvia or Lithuania, depending on where the border was. So his family came over during the Galveston period, probably around 1907, and they originally went to Maybank because somebody had a cousin that had a sister-in-law that lived in Maybank. But by about 1912, they had moved to Dallas, where the bright lights were. And Dad went to Forest High School, and his family didn't have any money. We don't know what my grandfather did, except that eventually he made enough money for them to live on South Boulevard, which was kind of the ritzy neighborhood in South Dallas. But anyway, Dad got a scholarship, a cavalry scholarship, to go to A&M in 1922. And when he got there, there were 6 Jews there, and he was one of the 4 that admitted it. And he originally wanted to be an architect, but he thought he'd make more money in mechanical engineering. So he went into mechanical engineering and went into the air conditioning business in 1928. Willis Carrier invented air conditioning in 1928. A lot of people don't know that. And had his own business here, and met my mother in 1938 when he went out to Sweetwater to air condition Levy Brothers. And that's how he met her. The Columbian Club, interesting thing about that, mainly it was for the German Jews, well, exclusively for the German Jews, but they had debutantes, just like the non-Jewish country clubs before the war, and they needed a stag line. And Dad was a college graduate and had his own business, so he was invited to join the Columbian Club, and he may well have been the first person who he belonged to Shereth that was invited to join the Columbian Club, and his number was 33. So I grew up at the Columbian Club. More about that later. So anyway, they eloped. She came in for the A&M on Thanksgiving for the football game, A&M versus Texas. His dad was an avid Aggie, and throughout his career he only hired one person that wasn't an Aggie, and it was the only Jew he hired, and the fellow went into business for himself, and Dad understood why he did it, but it broke his heart. But anyway, so they decided to elope for a variety of reasons, including the fact that her stepfather had heart trouble. So they went up to Oklahoma City to get married, and it was a Friday. And Dad didn't know anybody in Oklahoma City, and the rabbi thought something was fishy because Jews do not elope. And my mother said that son looked like it was going to sink any minute. So finally, Dad said, why didn't he call the carrier dealer in Oklahoma City? So the carrier dealer said he couldn't vouch for the girl, which was my mother, but Dad was okay, so the rabbi married them. I still have their marriage certificate. Great story. So anyway, they came to, so they settled in Dallas, and I was born October the 4th, 1941, during the Texas OU game. So all the Sweetwater people were there, not for me, but for the Texas OU game, because they all went to Texas. And what was happening, it was hot, and the windows were open, no air conditioning. And my grandmother grabbed the Gideon Bible that was in every hospital, including Florence Nightingale, and smushed the cockroach on my birth certificate, so I have cockroach juice on my birth certificate. And as I tell people, you can't get more Texan than that. So anyway, we lived in what's not called West Holland Park West, which was the other side of the tollway, which was a train track back then. And I remember reading about coal in school, but we didn't have coal, but if we walked along the train track, we could find coal, and I guess we were lucky we never got killed. So anyway, I started going to the Dallas public schools, but in the 4th grade I transferred. Dad made enough money for us to grow up in Holland Park on Ring's Place. And so I started going to the Holland Park schools, and I guess that's when I really, well, I became aware of really being Jewish when I was about 5 or 6 years old, when the war was over, because that's when the family brought over, my grandfather was one of 6 brothers, and the youngest stayed in Germany, in Memel, because he married into a family of jewelers, and they thought they could be protected with their money. And they ended up at Dachau, and the father ended up making jewelry out of dental gold. And the son was protected because he got to stay with his father, because the Nazis needed him to make the jewelry, and a sister was kind of left on her own. But anyway, they came over after the war. And that was Avram Bach and Harry Bach and Ollie Iskowitz. And Ollie's gone now, and so is Avram, and Harry is too now. But Harry eventually started Bachendorf Jewelers. And as I tell people, he taught me how to ride a bicycle and gave me a job. But I remember the grown-ups talking about the war after the cousins came over, and I had a pretty good idea of what happened, what went on, and it was pretty scary for me. And the Holland Park schools had devotions twice a day. In Jesus' name we pray, and this is public school, and in December they'd have one on Chinooka, which was really more offensive than that. And I was really scared that non-Jewish people were going to throw me in a camp, because if it happened in Germany, it could happen here. Now, I was really frightened for a long time, and I still had to say it, I get a little uneasy if I see a cross. I just do. So anyway, and it was very subtle, but in the 6th grade, there was me, there was Eleanor Levitt, and Carol Brooks. They are all who's here now. And all the girls in the 6th grade, except the 3 of us, were invited to join Miss Finley's dancing class. So there was that, and as Ronnie Cohen, who lives one apartment down from me, with whom I grew up, and we were in a Sunday school carpool together to the old temple in South Dallas, there was always an 800-pound gorilla in the room. And it was not great, although there were 3 Jews on our block counting us, but we were certainly in the minority, and it was uncomfortable. And I remember being at the temple or being at the Glimming Club or maybe my aunt's house or something, and I felt safe there. But anyway, so we went to the temple, and graduated high school.
Where did you belong?
We belonged to Temple.
Emmanuel?
Yeah, we were not, I must say, we were not real observant. Dad grew up in a kosher home, and my grandmother, I'm told my grandmother's backyard was full of cutlery and plates because he always got them mixed up, probably on purpose. And my mother grew up in Sweetwater, and my grandmother, who had grown up in Philadelphia, had a Jewish Sunday school in her living room, and people who lived in West Texas at the time had told me that that was the only Jewish education they got till they got to college. And my mother remembered that her stepfather went to New York and got a little Torah in a box with a curtain, and they would rent out a room in the Bluebonnet Hotel, and either a student rabbi or my step-grandfather would conduct services. And what happened after that, they finally built a temple in Abilene during the war because so many Jewish soldiers were there, and they donated that Torah to that temple. And I've seen pictures of a little hanging that it was donated by Mr. and Mrs. A. Levy. But what happened later, my mother's oldest stepsister married a man named Irving Loeb, and her older daughter moved to Dallas and married David Sikora, and was Ann Sikora, who everybody remembers. And Ann had 2 boys, and Danny, the older, they're all gone now, but Danny was gay, and they started a gay temple here and got Beth Bina and got a certificate or whatever from the Union of Reform Judaism that it was a real temple. And so Danny wanted that Torah for the temple, and it was his great-grandparents, and they wouldn't give it to him. They had another Torah, so they didn't really need that one, plus the fact there was maybe 2 Jews in Abilene at that time, if that. And I guess it was because he was gay, but I think that was an injustice. And so that was kind of a terrible thing. And Ann had a first cousin. Well, Ann's father's brother was Dr. Loeb, and his son was Peter Loeb, who is here now. He's not doing too well, but he was a GI doctor here in Dallas, and I introduced him to his wife, Gail. So anyway, I got married for the first time to a man named Harold Goodman, and it lasted 8 years, and we had 2 children, and it was kind of a mistake for both of us to get married, and it was actually, the divorce was probably better than most marriages. It was very cordial. We just shouldn't have been married to each other. And then I married a lovely man from South America, Guillermo Guzman, who looked like a movie star, and he was a rheumatologist. And together we had 1 child, Pepe, whose real name is Jose Bach Guzman, and he died about 16 years ago, and so I was on my own, and I thought it'd be nice to have somebody to have dinner with, so I got on the computer and met another lovely, wonderful man whose wife had died the same month that Gil died, and he lived in Fort Worth, and we got married, and that was Arthur Pawgan, who was also a doctor, a radiologist, and we lived in Fort Worth for 10 years and moved over here about 1.5 years ago. So that's because we both had daughters here, and we wanted to move over here before we had to. So in my life, I've really done kind of a lot of things. First of all, I ended up working for Harry for 10 years. I can't play mahjong. Every time I wanted to volunteer, they didn't need me. The job was full or whatever, and I'm too klutzy to play tennis, so I thought, okay, I'll go to work. So although I graduated college, I didn't have a teacher's certificate, so Harry was opening up the first store in Prestonwood, and so I went to work selling diamonds, and I used to say about Harry, he taught me how to ride a bicycle and gave me a job, and that lasted about 10 years, and it was interesting, and everybody should have work behind a counter at some point because it's a real learning experience, I've got to tell you that. So after that, things were going pretty well, and anyway, Gil suggested that I get into politics, and so I thought, okay. So the Republican Party in the 80s was nowhere like it is now, and so I was a Republican Jewish woman with a Hispanic surname, and I really had a great time. I was on the original National Jewish Republican Board. I was on a state board, the board for licensed professional counselors, and I was on a city board, urban rehab. And everything was going great until it wasn't. And well, with the Jewish Republicans, they couldn't have been nicer. And we went to the State Department and we went to embassies, and Irving Crystal spoke to us, and it was great. But then after 2 years, they finally hit me up and said if I wanted to stay on the board, I had to give them $5,000. So I figured if I had eaten about $250 worth of meals, so I gave them a check for $250 and said thank you. So that was that, and then everything else just kind of went sour with politics, as far as I was concerned, and I ended up a lot more liberal than I thought I would be. But anyway, I didn't know what to do, so Gil said, why don't you go back to school? I said, okay, because I'd run out of options, and I had a history degree I hadn't done anything with, so I started going to North Texas, and majoring in history, minoring in poli-sci, and every time I wrote a paper, I noticed there was something about Jews in it, so I kind of majored in American Jewish history, and I did teach a class here last year, but I taught in the adult ed department at SMU for years, and then at TCU in their Silver Frogs program for years, and something new always comes up, like Alexander Hamilton turned up Jewish, who knew? So anyway, that's what happened, and here I am now, and you know, I've done a lot of things, but as far as the Columbian Club, which I did want to talk about a little bit, I was there at the groundbreaking for the new one in Carrollton, which is no more, but the old one, I wrote my dissertation on Dr. Lefkowitz, who was really built Temple Emmanuel up to what it is, and his first wedding in 1920 was a couple that was getting married in a week. And this was the Saturday night before the wedding, and the groomsmen were giving a dinner dance. And they had lots of theme parties back then, and the theme then was the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh my God.
And the paper talked about it in the social column, but unfortunately there were no pictures. But my son said, you know, they drove in open cars to get there, and the social column did say that the green light cast a weird glow over the costumes. And it was pretty bad. If you read what happened in the 20s, reading the Temple newsletters, very prejudiced, awful stuff. But anyway, that was Dr. Lefkowitz's first encounter with Temple Emmanuel. But he was just great, and I think my favorite story was there were two little boys talking, and one said, I'm looking for God. He was looking behind the curtain at the bema. And he said, I'm looking for God. And the other little boy said, well, he's sitting right there, and that was Dr. Lefkowitz. And he was so revered, and he was the first Jew to have a book published at SMU Press, and he was on the radio, and a lot of things that Olin is given credit for, Lefkowitz did.
He
and
started,
I feel really strongly about that. And when Bob Weinfeld was here, I wanted to talk about Dr. Lefkowitz, and he wanted to talk about me, but I think Lefkowitz is really an unsung hero in this whole thing with the Jewish community. He was just a wonderful, wonderful man, and he is actually the reason the Federation supported Israel, because the American Council for Judaism was alive and well at the time, and Lessing Rosenwald, who was the son of the man who was the CEO of Sears, well, so was Lessing Rosenwald, I think. But also he gave a lot of money for black schools all over the South, which he should be remembered for. I had a column in Life magazine saying that you don't need a political state for Jews, because the Jews should be an equal citizen anywhere in the world. And while that's true, it was a pretty hard sell in 1940. And a lot of people at the temple felt that way, and in 1947, Lefkowitz was at a Federation meeting and said, look, you can debate all you want, but our people are dying. We've got to support Israel. And it was because he had the power and the presence to be able to do that. He had so much power that before we had single-member districts in Dallas, it was all city, all at large. They were all at large. And there was something called the Citizens Charter Association. They picked out a slate. He was a member of the Citizens Charter Association. So he had a say-so in who got to be on the city council, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a rabbi in Dallas with that kind of power.
These days.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Plus, just a really nice guy, and he, when they opened his drawer after he died, they found full of IOUs, and he actually gave away half of his salary every year, which the most he ever made was $8,000. And Sadie, his wife, sold all her clothes and her daughter Helen's clothes, and he was just a man. She was just a Rebbe. And Rabbi Klein was like that. He was in that same mold, and I still miss Rabbi Klein. So anyway, that's pretty much what happened, and I feel, and when I was in grad school, I felt very strongly about being Jewish because we just weren't mentioned. And one of the things that happened in grad school is terrible. I was writing a paper on Moses Mendelssohn, who was the grandfather of the composer. And when he went from Warsaw to Berlin, which was about the time of the Revolutionary War, there were separate gates you had to go through to get into Berlin, depending upon your status. And the Jews had to go through the same gate as animals. And there was a girl in my class, maybe 25 years old, who was giggling, and I said, what's so funny about that? And when you think, here Moses Mendelssohn had to go through the Cow's Gate, and at this time, around this time, the Constitution was being ratified, and Gershon Mendesekis, who was the Hazen, because he wasn't a rabbi, but he was the spiritual leader of the synagogue in New York, Shereth Israel, marched as an equal. I get verklempt every time I think about it. Marched as an equal with the other clergymen. Mm-hmm. And there was a kosher table.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the difference. And, it's just amazing. We're so lucky to be in this country, and hope we keep it. And
yeah.
I guess that's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
that.
Thank you.
You have a great history here. Fantastic. Thank
you. Well, as a historian,
yeah.
I kind of felt it was my duty.
Yeah, that's okay. There's not too
one
many
other
natives
thing
here.
about the Climate Club, I guess you turned it off.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
The old club on Garland Road had a putting green. They didn't have a golf course, they had a putting green. So on Easter, they had an Easter egg hunt with candy eggs. Of course they did. I mean, they used to have a big bowl of shrimp at every wedding, pretty much, except my daughter's wedding, because we didn't do it. But somebody said, and the big night was lobster night. And somebody said, how can you serve lobster at a Jewish club? I said, that's the whole point, which it was. But I was really mad at my mother, because my mother never got on the committee to hide the Easter eggs. And there were candy eggs on it, those Cadbury candy eggs. And so every child whose mother was on the committee told the kids where the eggs were. So they won the eggs. It was great. I mean, there were the Pop Kitchens, who was the lifeguard, more or less, taught us how to swim by throwing us in the deep end. And it worked.
Yeah, it works.
We're still here.
Kids aren't scared of water that way.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, but it was great. I mean, you could go there, and if you had a pulse, you could get in. And you could go there on Sunday brunch. It was a party, and and I was married there. My daughter was married there. I took my grandchildren swimming there, so 4 generations swam in that pool, and it was just a lovely thing. And unfortunately, they overspent on the golf course, and by that time, pretty much everybody in North Dallas that wanted a pool had one, and the JCC was up and running, and so it kind of died. But those were the days.
That's right. When did it move to Carrollton?
Oh, about 1952, and I remember being at the
Because that's the only one I know. I didn't know
Okay.
the other one. So.
And I remember being there at the groundbreaking, and they had a bomb shelter.
Oh.
Because that was the Red Scare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there is a non-Jewish lady here, Terry Jones, that lived on Avalon. And the old club was on Garland Road, and to get there, we would drive down Tokelon, which was the street behind it. And I just remember East Dallas as being fairyland. It was just these great big houses in the Spanish moss, and absolutely gorgeous.
Wow.
And the other thing, Arthur grew up in New York, my husband. So he was telling me how his father used to take him to all the factories. Well, my mother did the same thing here, because we had factories in Dallas.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, Dad had gone to high school with Elsie Frankfurt, who founded Page Boy. And I got to go in the factory, and at the time I was the sample size, so I had all these maternity clothes nobody had. So it was great. And
Yeah.
but being Jewish, there was always this curtain. And Arthur didn't have that growing up in Brooklyn. As a matter of fact, Betty Lorch, who lives here, lived 2 blocks away from him, but they didn't know each other because she's a little older. But Elaine and I have found 2 cousins here. When Bob Weinfeld interviewed me, this lady came up to me and said, because it said Jane Pawgan, she said, "I'm your cousin," and her grandfather was my grandfather's brother, my Uncle Philip, but, and her mother was Lena, and I remember Lena, but the Bach family was famous for not being close, and there is a lady named Carolyn Gay that just moved across the hall from Elaine Bach, who's Harry Bach's widow. So 2 new Bach cousins, or Bachettes,
Right.
have showed up.
Are here. What do you know?
Yeah,
It's a small world.
it is a small world. But anyway, I love doing history, and Barry and I guess, I don't know, are going to be doing a program with the rabbi here.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah, so,
that's good.
yeah.
She's amazing.
Oh, she's great.
She is truly amazing. Well,
She's
we're,
great.
we're lucky to have her at the Dallas Jewish Historical
I told her she is the only other female Jewish historian I've ever met my whole life. And it was like, oh my God. So there was another one.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
I appreciate